All right, if you look inside of there, you're going to see the orange wire and the pilot tube going up into the unit. Okay? Also what you see is the burner orifice. Okay? Not the burners, because you can actually remove this airplane box. It has 4 bolts, 2 on each side of it that are 1/2 inch. You can actually pull the whole thing off. The only thing you would have to do is disconnect the wires from the gas valve, and this whole blower motor airplane will come off, and it exposes the burners. But again, I've never pulled the burners out except for once. One time in the factory, some guy was rushing and he put the burners in upside down. Took me a while to figure out what the hell it was, but when I did, I actually figured out what it was. And if that ever happens, you'll probably get on the phone with me, and I'll probably, as a last resort, tell you how to do that. But it's not something that happens that often. All right?
Richard?
Yeah.
Can you explain this? Can you guys see how many burners this
Yeah.
water heater has? So 100 to 70.
Yeah.
How many burners do you see?
Right.
3.
3 burners.
3 burners.
So, is the burner the same burners on all BTUs of the G&U water heater? Yes. Yes. The only difference is that orifice bar that goes across there gives you your BTUs. So in other words, it's a different hole orifice that actually, so that big, I mean, the more BTUs, the bigger the hole gets. That feeds into the stainless steel burners that are inside the chamber. Okay? And in chambers, there's 3 burners, and they're held in, interesting enough, by the same panhead screws we're using to take, not panhead, but self-drilling screws we're using to take them out. And they just slide right out. Okay? There's a whole nother way to get inside the chamber that you will never have to do, because by the time you need to do that, this water heater is probably dead and gone somewhere else. It's a very well-built water heater. Really well-built, as opposed to the other companies I used to work for. Water heater manufacturers are really getting to the point where they want the water heater to die. Why? Because they want to sell another one, okay? It's kind of like cars these days, you know. We can't even diagnose cars anymore. We have to take them to the shop, somebody has to plug them up, you know, and look at them. I wanted to tell you this little tidbit. I've been to all 3 major manufacturers' factories, and I walked into all 3 of them, what they call research rooms, where they actually study the water heaters. Rheem is the only manufacturer that studies its own water heaters. The other 2 are studying Rheem. On the commercial side, now I can't tell you about the residential side, but the commercial side, it is the best commercial on the market. But even with the other brands, the ultra low NOx is still ultra low NOx. The other brands also need the same things that these need. Good combustion air, good exhaust air, and the right gas flow. Just so you know. I don't like to differentiate from either of brands, but trust me, if one of those 3 things are wrong with another brand of water heater, more than likely you're going to have problems. The difference is what I'm about to show you. Has anybody ever worked on a Bradford White commercial? Or you have?
Nobody has?
Yeah.
Nobody has? Everybody has?
Yeah.
The pilot assembly that comes on those units has 2 wires, right? And it has 2 prongs. Well, Rheem took that away. Let me show you. So, there's 2 screws that actually hold the pilot assembly in. You go inside here, and you take it. And the pilot assembly also has a sight glass on it. So when it goes in, it goes to the right. The sight glass actually goes to the right of the unit. So it matches up with this sight glass, so when you look through it, you can actually see. If it's on the left side, that's your problem. Whatever wire won't fire. That screwdriver.
Do we have a bigger head on the screwdriver?
I don't want to mess this screw up. We'll never get it out. Anybody got a better screwdriver?
I need it. I need it.
Yeah, Phillips.
Phillips.
Yeah.
The bigger head.
I usually have a long one when we used yesterday. I don't want it.
Yeah,
going to what they call a flame sensor spark igniter. And that igniter sparks and it checks the flame before it actually turns on the burner. So we were talking about gas pressure earlier. The gas pressure needs to be right. The gas pressure needs to be right for that flame to be right for it to actually ignite the burner. All right, so when you get the screws out, kind of wiggle the pilot assembly out. You have to turn it to get it out of the hole. You can't pull it straight out because of the eyes on the pilot. So I usually turn it up and then I pull it out. All right, so there's your pilot. Now look, right now this thing has a little bit of white stuff on it, which came from the insulation jacket around the side of the water heater. But this rod right here is your flame sensor spark ignition. So if you pull this pilot out and that's all carboned up, you can just take a little emery cloth or anything you got. Sometimes I just use a screwdriver, clean that carbon up, put it back in the unit, and more than likely that's what your problem was. But if you pull this out and this pilot is all sooted up or maybe even gone, you're going to have to replace the pilot. But you're also going to have to figure out what caused it. And what caused it? One of those three things. Okay? Because you see where the pilot was, right? It sits right on the outside of the chamber. The only way for this thing to be burnt up is because it kept flaming out every time it fired. So after a while, every time that flame will actually turn and burn because it's the most. How do you guys deal with that?
Now, when you say flame out, you're talking about rollout.
I'm talking about rollout because the exhaust is wrong,
Right.
the intake is wrong, or your gas flow is wrong. Every time this water heater fires, there's a burst of energy. The higher the BTUs, the more the burst. If it doesn't flow up, it's going to push back, and it's going to do like this inside the chamber. Now, the other problem was a couple of years ago, around the burner chamber inside the Wichita, there's what they call a retainer ring that retains the insulation and the burner chamber itself. It goes all the way around, but at the air plenum and the burner side, it's reduced down to about 2 inches from 6 inches, okay? That piece of metal that is going across here, what do you think happens every time this water heater flames out? That metal starts to melt or starts to come. Now, they tell me that they have reinforced it with a bigger and better weld inside of it so it doesn't move. I guess they kind of spot welded it all over so it doesn't move. But I have come to heaters where I'm able to stick my finger in there or my flashlight and I can see that ring has warped and it's slid down and it hit right on the pilot. If it does that, it's going to ground out the pilot. All right? The other thing you can do, if you're not sure if your pilot is actually working, in this position you can actually test the pilot. Before I do that, I'm going to turn it back on and press this go. Come up here and just kind of put your hand in there and tell me what you feel. Don't worry, there's no gas. It ain't going to burn you. Just put your hand in there. You feel that air? Yes. Okay. The reason why the pilot or the lights hasn't came on yet is because there's no cover. So watch. There's your pilot. Now, if you're doing this with the gas on, your pilot just lit for you. And you can actually test it that way, but as soon as that pilot lights, take your hand out. Because the next thing is that the burners are going to ignite. Gas is going to fill out. Now, can you test it without you just turn off the gas valve so you know? But the problem is the pilot won't like it, and you'll at least know that your pilot still is sparking. So what happens when that's sparking, you know your module is good, you know your pilot is actually getting spark ignition, you know everything is great, put it back in there and you're fine. If you put it back in there and it doesn't light, the thing I told you about that metal inside that ring, you're gonna have to figure out if it's there. So usually what I do is I take my finger and I measure the distance, which is going right to the line of my knuckle, and I take my finger and I stick it into the hole. And if I feel anything to the left where the pilot is, I know that that's what's causing the pilot to ground out. Can you fix it? Yes. Take something. I actually have a couple of long needle nose pliers, and one of them are bent at the top. So I can go in there, and you don't have to take anything apart. You can do it right through the pilot hole. Just grab it, twist it. Sometimes it's so burnt up that you just chip it away, and then take your finger, put it back in there, and make sure it's clear. Put your pilot back in there, and you should be good to go. Really should be good to go. Again, it's the one component that causes all other failures. Once that signal starts to go back up into that module from the spark ignition, from it just sitting there and trying to spark, that module will actually probably be the first part that goes. The caveat to it is, if you come and you find this water heater with a very caked up vent screen, and it's really bad, it's possible that something has got through the blower motor into the air hose and went up and caused your pressure switch not to work. So that's where I get the 3 parts from. Other than that, you should be fine. Should be fine with just kind of carrying those 3 parts, or even having them at your shop. So if you have to come back and get it, it's fine. But I wouldn't go out and buy it. But here's the interesting thing, is that there's a lot of water heaters that are pulled out for various reasons. We didn't go over the water and the testing of the tank, which I'm going to do right now. But they're pulled out for a lot of reasons, and it's mostly because the plumbers don't know, or the guy that installed it doesn't know what I just showed you. So I'll go to a wholesale shop and I'll find a water heater sitting there, and they've actually gotten credit on it. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go get those 3 parts. I'm going to get the module, because the module is like $200 and something odd wholesale. The igniter is like $130, and I think the pressure switch is about $8. So when you see that, and it's at one of your wholesale shops where you just bought one, grab that stuff if they'll let you take it. It's important, really important. But again, all 3 of those parts, something caused them to go. Keep that concept in your mind, and you go up and look and say, look at the exhaust, it's all screwed up. Or you guys see that, you see that vent cap right there? That could be a problem for one of these heaters. And the reason is because when that burst of air comes up, it hits, and then it's trying to go out through those little vents. I like to see open air vents, the type that are open on both sides, so when it comes out, it just goes. It could be a problem, it depends on the BTUs, but when it fires, you'll know. So remember when I told you I put this up on top? You can do this with a piece of toilet paper, a piece of string, or whatever's light. Water heater fires, that thing stays there, you're good. If it blows it off, you've got an exhaust blockage problem, okay? Any questions? Come on, you guys gotta have some questions. No? All right.
You can also do the same thing with the lighter, right? A little lighter up.
You can do a lighter, yeah. You can do the same thing with the lighter, the exact same thing. All right. These water heaters are tested, pressure tested. The tanks were pressure tested for 300 pounds PSI, okay? In the factory. So if I get a call and they are telling me I just installed a water heater and it's leaking, I'm not buying it. Is it possible? Yes, but what is really the most prevalent possibility is this right here, which is your TMP, your drain valve, or your 2 thermostat ports. Thermostat ports, these nuts right here are your seals. So they have a little rubber seal in them. If you need to change the thermostat, you don't have to take these out. You can just do what's coming. It's like a tube that goes in there, and the thermostat rod goes inside of it. And the same thing behind this one. Up in the top of this heater, and this is something that's really cool that the other manufacturers don't do. The other manufacturers fill the top of their water heaters with foam insulation. Rheem doesn't do it, and I'll tell you why they don't do it. It's because in the top of the heater is your anode rods. There's 4 anode rods for the 200. I think there's 6 for the 4, 6, or the, yeah, 4, and 6, I think, or something like that, depending on the BTUs, whatever the BTUs are and how big it is, the anno rod's in there. Does everybody know what an anno rod does? Anybody?
Sacrificial rod
Sacrificial rod for what?
for rust,
For rust.
corrosion.
Rust. Well, inside of the tank is glass lined, right? So there's not supposed to be any rust inside of it.
Around the ports.
Imperfections in the line.
Not sediment. That's what people think, but it's not sediment. Okay. This thing right here actually takes care of. It's supposed to take care of sediment. This is also a clean out cover for cleaning out sediment. Right. This is called a diffuser tube that goes in the heater, which you don't really have to use, in particularly if you're using the top ports, because there's another one on the cold side of this water heater. This one goes on the cold side of either the front port or the back port, and it has what's called, and it points down. The reason why it points down is because it wants the incoming water to swirl around the sediment, okay? But sediment has nothing to do with aniline. Every water heater from a residential up to a commercial has what they call a glass lining in it, and all brands do it. After they seal the tank up, they shoot this material in there, and it's a sand material, but it's heated up and then it coats the inside of the tank. The anno rods are sacrificial lambs, just like you said. What they're doing is that they're filling the imperfections in that glass lining. And when the anno rod is gone, then the rust comes into play because there's no protection for the glass lining. So over a 3-year period, which is why they warranty for 3 years, more than likely those anno rods are gone. And that's when you get a tank breach, because the first place it's going to breach is probably on one of the welds on the bottom of the tank or on the top of the tank. Or right out the gate, if you feel that there's a water leak, you can take your damper off and you can look down inside the cavity. You can actually see the anno rods. You can see the nipples that are going down into the tank. So this is what I recommend when you fill up the water in one of these tanks and you pressurize it. That's one of the first things you do is get up in the top of it and make sure there's no water coming through that cavity. The other thing that I do is I take my pressure gauge, and I'm sure you guys, if you don't have pressure gauges, you should have them. I put my pressure gauge on the drain valve and I check the pressure. And the reason I check the pressure because if it's reading 100 psi, what do you think is going to happen when it heats 100 gallons of hot water up? It's going to raise to minimum of 150 where the TMP is supposed to open up. And then it's going to find its next best option. And in my opinion, the next best option will be the anno rods in the top of the water heater. Or the TMP wasn't completely tightened down at the factory, or your drain valve wasn't tightened down at the factory. Or the last thing is your possibility is your connections that you made in the ports, in and out. So right out of the gate, the only thing that's going to convince me that it's leaking is that you're going to tell me you see water in that cavity and it's an anno rod leak. And then I'm going to tell you to get a socket out, go inside the cavity, which you can do, and try to tighten them down. If you can't, then we're going to tell you to pull the water heater. We're not going to try to tell you to try to pull one up, because then you have to take this whole cap off. All right, but you can use a socket and go in and try to tighten it down. But that's very rare. But when you tell me you got 100 incoming PSI, it's too much for a commercial water heater. So the other part of it is, what should be installed with this water heater, or any commercial water heater? Expansion tank. Exactly. Exactly. That would be the other question that I ask when somebody tells me it's leaking. I'm going to say, is there an expansion tank on it? Did you ensure that it's actually pumped up to the right pressure? I mean, they are usually preset, but you can test them with a pressure gauge on to find out if they're actually operating. I had a customer at a yacht club where I live in the Bay Area. It's actually the Oakland Yacht Club that called me all been out of shape. He has water all over the place, and I get out there, and the plumber did a great job installing it, but the expansion tank is in the corner, and he never hooked it up. Never hooked it up. So I did him a favor, and I told the factory that it was leaking through the anno rods and got him another water heater, because I didn't know if the rest of the tank was breaching. It could have been, because that thing was reaching somewhere around 130 PSI before they even heated up the water. When the water heats, the pressure rises, okay? And in my opinion, there should be an expansion tank on all water heaters that have a closed combustion chamber these days. And that's from the smallest ones to the biggest one. Or there should be at least be a PRV valve on the house somewhere, or on the building somewhere. But I would not take the chance of not putting an expansion tank on a commercial water heater depending on, because the building has a PRV valve in it. I wouldn't do it. I would just put an expansion tank on it. It's a lot cheaper, it's a lot safer. Anybody see the Mythbusters or the science show that had the water heater that exploded? Everybody thinks that was exploding from gas. No, that was exploding from water pressure. It shot so many feet in the air, it's because of water pressure.
Talking about the PRV, that happened in Irvine.
Yeah, yeah,
Talking about the PRV, I think 2 people died.
Right.
The thing shot through the roof.
yeah, yeah. The other manufacturer that I was working for a few years ago, they used to have this T-shirt. And the T-shirt said, "Do it yourself, you only have yourself to blame." There was a guy, he had a saw in one hand and a wrench in the other hand, but the water heater was hanging from some things and upside down, so he thought it had to hang for water to flow through the house. It was very interesting. So, but I used to wear that T-shirt proudly because it's what I used to deal with all the time, this idiot stuff like that. And plumbers get mad at me on a daily basis because I challenge them. I just do. That's what my job is to do, is to challenge them. That's the reason why they hired me, was to challenge the plumbers on their install. And if you're not convincing me that the install is right, you're not going to convince me that you actually need service. It's just that simple. Okay? Getting back to what happens in the factory, they take the tank and they pump it full of air before it has a jacket or anything on it. They seal up all the holes, they pump it full of air, and they dunk it into a tank, a water tank, just like you do a tire. That's the first time. The second time, they do it again later on down the assembly line. And then the third time is after they put these on, they put a pressure gauge on it to see if it's actually filled with water, and they put a pressure gauge on it to see if it's actually holding the right pressure. And if you call tech support and you tell them it's leaking, tech support, the first thing they're going to tell you is they'll put a pressure gauge on the valve and tell me what you're reading, the incoming pressure. They don't want it on the building, they want it right there on the water heater. Okay? Now, with that said, I'm not telling you guys to go call tech support. Okay? This is the honest truth. There are some great guys back there. The chances of you getting them on the phone are kind of zero. Okay? All right? So what you will get is a person that tells you, "Oh, it must be the gas valve." And you're thinking, okay, we'll ship you one out, right? That gas valve will show up 2 days later, and guess what? It's not the gas valve. But what we just went through with the light sentinel on the Wichita, you're going to already know that it's not the gas valve. But by the way, that thing I told you about, the metal inside of the chamber, the clue would be is that every light is on and the gas valve's not coming on. Okay? So the pressure, the exhaust, the intake, and the gas pressure. Those are 3 things you must clear before you actually fire it up in this water. If you fire it up with one of those 3 things wrong, the way I see it, you're on your own. Okay? It's just that simple. Okay? But that doesn't mean I won't help you with it. But if you call me back 2 days later and say, "Hey, it's still doing it," I'm going to ask you, did you fix one of those 3 things that we needed, or send me pictures. I'm going to give you that pretty much spiel, is that you've got to fix one of those 3 things, or all 3 of them. Will the water heater work without it? Yeah, for a while. But eventually it's going to shut down. Questions? Come on, you guys.
What is the right pressure
Huh?
for the water heater?
Anybody want to answer this question? What should be incoming pressure? What's ideal? What do you think the pressure is on this building?
65.
There you go. There you go. Why? From a dead cold, 65 would double by the time this thing heated to whatever temperature setting you had it to. So if you're doubling 65, you got 130. You're under the 150 that opens up the TMP valve. Right?
So when you pressurize those at the factory,
Say that again?
when you pressurize those at the factory, what do they pressurize them to internally?
You mean
I mean,
the
because
TNT
they have
valve?
to go over, well, they have to
300
go
pounds.
over the rating.
300 pounds. 300 pounds. That's what the tank is rated for 300 pounds of pressure. Come on, you gotta have another question, or did I cover everything well? Nobody has another question? You wanna go over it again? You wanna see the igniter lighting? Somebody wanna come and put this back together? No. Why ain't it working?
Yeah.
I tell you, I told Garrett about this group yesterday. You guys are pretty knowledgeable. You pretty much know a lot of stuff that I tell you, but here's the question for you. Have you went out recently and installed a water heater in those conditions, or one of those 3 conditions? Come on, you can be honest. You can tell your bosses. Just it's okay.
Many.
Huh? Maybe? You don't think so?
No, I've
Every,
seen some out there with the just the 90 kind of 5 degree out.
yeah, they're definitely there, and those are the ones that our mega team get calls about all the time.
Hey
So,
Richard, I think yesterday they were talking, the most common thing these guys will see is the exhaust not having the room, right?
yes,
The exhaust will probably be the biggest problem these guys are gonna.
yeah, I told them that there are products out there. There's draft inducers that you can get that you can hook to this water heater. When the thermostat is calling for heat, it will turn on that draft inducer and actually start to pull the exhaust out of the unit.
So they.
And I think
So you do
Ranger or
that,
somebody
you
like
use
that.
90s?
Huh?
Like if you do that, can you use 90s?
I recommend never using a 90, ever.
Or, I mean, 45 depends. Whatever.
45 is always best, but never, ever.
Not
Use a
I'm
90.
in a bed.
It's kind of like,
It's
here's,
like sewer pipe. You don't want to use.
look, these are some pictures that I took of one that pretty much explains it. You can pass them around if you want. All right, and that terminates into, there are old, can't think of what they're called, but they're oval-shaped elbows that the pipe comes into, and it's flat on the bottom or closed on the bottom, and then it goes up. And people are really, because that's the old venting that they used to use on the water heater, they think it's fine. But remember, if you put that up on top of the water heater, or you do a draft test on it, you're gonna find that that's not working either, okay? And then the last one is, what's wrong with this picture?
Wow. Oh, yeah.
Okay? You can't reduce the vent down to a smaller size either, the exhaust vent down to a smaller size. All you're doing is causing problems inside the combustion chamber. Matter of fact, I wouldn't even want to be living around that particular area.
So if you guys remember too, the 3 things that he's talking about, and if the exhaust isn't ideal, you can make the gas and the combustion air perfect,
Yeah,
then you should have.
and you can live with
You
it.
can live it, you know.
But you don't want 2 of those 3 things wrong, okay? But even if you do have, say it's the exhaust, right? And the water heater does decide it's gonna shut down, more than likely, you got a carbon buildup on the igniter. And all you have to do is go and pull the igniter and clean it. And I'll tell you, Marty might know this. How you doing, Marty, by the way?
Hi.
The igniters, would you say we sell a lot of those? Because I know in Hayward, they just kind of sit in a box. Very rigid igniter.
Yeah.
Very rigid. Right? Anything else?
Richard, can you
Okay.
explain to these guys that they ended up bypassing the damper, make sure it's open?
Yes.
Remember we showed them yesterday?
Yeah, we went through that. We went through that. You guys all know that. We went through that. It was one of the first things we went through. Yesterday, we talked about that you guys have installed a couple of our high efficiencies in some of the pizza kitchens.
We did a spider. Up
Yeah,
in,
spider fire.
Victoria Gardens.
The Spider is the high efficiency unit that is, to me, the most kick-ass unit in the industry. I think it's the best in the market. And I was talking about this yesterday with somebody later in the day. It has an ignition system on it that's second to none. The other brands use what they call a hot surface or a pancake type igniter. Well, the igniter in ours is about as rigid as the screwdriver. It's about that thick actually, and it goes down into the water heater. You can drop it, step on it, scrape it, do whatever you want to do, and it's still going to work. The BW line has a hot surface igniter, and believe me, I know when I worked at that company, I used to have to go and change them, and I would always take an extra one with me and put it in the top of the water heater because I knew it was going to go out again. It's also what I call a tankless water heater that has a tank. Okay, I got some pictures, I'll show you a little bit of it in a second. But it will take 100 gallons of hot water from whatever the cold temperature is, say it's 65 degrees, and heat it to 120 degrees in about 7 minutes flat. Okay, that's kick-ass, all right? And the higher the BTUs, the shorter that time is. So if you got a 400,000 BTU, it's probably around 5 minutes, just a kick-ass unit. The interesting thing about these units is that they are PVC or plastic pipe vented, more likely it should be PVC. It has an exhaust and intake system on it that you can actually co-vent into a concentric kit and go out through one hole for that kit, or you can go out through 2 holes, right? It's very similar to a tankless water heater. But with that said, just like the metal vented products, you don't want to use 90s in close proximity with each other on the exhaust in these units, because you're going to restrict that flow, and it's going to do the same thing back in the unit and start to cause problems with it. The difference is that the ignition system on that doesn't burn up like some of the other ignition systems on the other ones. This is, you really can't look. Rheem took their exhaust, and on the heater it actually comes out of the bottom of the heater, of which we don't have that heater here, and it runs up the side of the heater, and then it goes into a 90, about from the bottom to the top, and it's something like 5 to 6 feet depending on how high the big the heater is, and then it comes out the back and it stops right here. Right there is where you start to make your connections, okay? And then the intake is on the opposite side of the heater where you make your connections to that, and it's 3-inch PVC piping. Now the key to it is that right here on the part that comes off the top of the heater, there's a sticker, and that sticker said, do not remove or alter in any way or it voids the warranty. And if I see that, I'm automatically voiding the warranty because you just caused a very bad problem inside of the water heater. No, maybe I should back up. The water heater, I said it was kind of like a tankless. It has a 4-pass system. The water goes in like this. And by the time when it comes in, and by the time it comes out the other side is when it's already heated to that 120 or 130 degree temperature that you set, just through the top of the water heater. That's exactly what a tankless does. But the heater is actually storing 100 gallons of hot water instead of being into the house or into the complex. So the venting is so important to it breathing. The exhaust venting is so important to it breathing and operating properly. If it doesn't, the water heater will shut itself down. And the interesting thing about this heater, and I don't know what the other brands are doing at this moment because I haven't seen one, but there's a display screen on the front of the water heater that is self-diagnostic. It will actually tell you, you got a block exhaust, you got a bad pressure switch, you got a bad igniter, or it actually tells you, in layman's terms, I'm sure you can press a button and it will actually tell you what's wrong with the water heater. Unlike this where you got to kind of know what the lights are doing, it's an LED screen and it actually tells you what's going on with it. But anyway, I wanted to show you these pictures, and as you look at them, you can see, I'll show you at the bottom down here. This is kind of how I'm coming off the top of the water heater. That's the exhaust, and look what the guy did.
So does it condensate real bad?
It does condensate, huh?
You used 45s.
Yeah, but what about the 290s first?
What about
Look,
the
he's
food?
got 290s and 245s in about 3 foot of space.
You still need a food?
is actually the water heater, and this is the guy that I actually voided the water heater. Because, you see the pipe up there? It's supposed to be going in a 90 back towards the back of the water heater. He cut it off. And he started, boy, it's working. I don't care. The manufacturer says. Now the difference is that BW and, what's the other manufacturer? AO, I couldn't even think of it for a minute. They don't do that. They don't do the exhaust for you for the first 5 to 8 feet or whatever it is coming off the heater. They allow you to do it, and it's a big mistake on their part, in my opinion. Big mistake. All right? Lastly, this is how that water heater, another water heater is actually terminated.
Coming out of the ground?
No, it's coming out of, this is a, what's it called? Now, there's two major problems. There's actually 3. Can anybody tell me what the problem is here?
Intake and exhaust too close together.
Say that again?
Intake and exhaust too close together.
They're too close together. That's the first thing. What is the other thing? You have to really look at that picture to see.
Too close to the stucco and 45 degrees down.
That's actually a carport that those vents are in. Okay? And he's wondering why the water heater's having problems. Number 1, the exhaust is being pulled right back into the intake. And number 2, there's no way for it to go anywhere because it's in a carport. Right? Another guy that gets mad at me. I'm sorry. I was brought to this company to actually challenge the plumbers, and that's exactly what I did. Okay? But anyway, if you look at this picture, this is a picture of the spider fire. You can see this is the LED screen on it that tells you what's going on with the heater.
And they're very quiet.
And they're very quiet. They get a little louder as the BTUs are increased. So if it's a 400,000 BTU, it has a 3-speed fan on it, and that's kind of how the CPMs would get a little louder. But the smaller ones are very quiet. If you ever heard of cyclone, trust me, this water heater will replace a cyclone in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. Any question, guys? And maybe in the near future, when you guys start installing more of those, I'll come back and we'll do a live training with that one too. Okay?
Hey, Alvaro, you got how many spider fires?
We only have one at CPK, Victoria Gardens.
Okay, nothing.
Well, that's the one because we remove
We remove the wrapper
ASB or whatever,
yeah.
The cyclone?
the cyclone. We remove one of those cyclones. And that's eventually we're gonna replace the other one. So
Right.
and all that's fire.
So where is that unit prevalent? That unit is very important to somebody that's having trouble keeping up with the demand of hot water. It's a really cool unit that will actually keep up with the demand. You would have to probably put 3 of these in there to deal with one of those can actually handle. And this is something that I always tell people too. Restaurants they kill us because they're the ones that call up complaining the most because they have no backup in there for hot water. And when it goes down, it's an emergency. They've got to have it because they know if the health inspector comes by and finds out they have no hot water, they're going to shut down. I always recommend, at the very least, putting a backup tankless water heater in a restaurant. Very least. Okay? I know the booster pumps and boosters for the dishwashers and all of that stuff inside of restaurants are very important to washing dishes. And if you have no way to wash those dishes and the inspector comes, so I personally, if I owned a restaurant, I would definitely put me a tankless water heater as a backup, or I'd put me something that would actually have me hot water than a commercial water heater. Remember, no matter what commercial you buy, whatever brand it is, still a 3-year warranty. So after the first year, after the first year, it's a courtesy for the factory to actually say they will send a technician out to come and fix it. Because honestly, I've never understood this, why water heaters are different than other things. If your cable goes out, you call the cable man and he says, okay, we'll be there on Thursday between 12 and 4 or between 8 and 12. But when the water heater goes out, we're expected to be there lickety-split, and people don't want to hear that answer. So, anyway, guys, what time is it? How we doing?
We did great.
8:32. Okay. Anything?
So you can only use PVC on the spider?
Yes.
So I saw the TMP also PVC.
Uh,
On the picture.
The TMP line, you mean the pressure relief line? I have no preference for that, but I can tell you different codes does. Different areas, they won't let you use PVC on any kind of hot water.
Because I saw it on
Right
the
now.
picture.
But that was believe me, that guy was mad at me. Oh, I did forget to mention, if you look at that picture, don't you see a very small yellow gas line running in there? Okay, so he was all messed up, all right? And this was a restaurant too. So, other than that, gentlemen, I don't have much more for you. We got through this really fast. There weren't as many questions. I'm hoping that's because you guys are sharper than the other crew. I didn't mean to say that, but I did.
So Alberto, I'll give my cards out too, and
Yeah.
I did have a question on that spider. You
Uh-huh.
were saying not to use 90s on the exhaust, but yet you guys build one into it?
No, I didn't say not to use 90. I said not to use it in close proximity.
Okay.
You can use
You
it.
need to.
And I recommend if you don't have to use 90,
Right.
use 45s, okay? But you shouldn't put them in close proximity because here's the concept. You take a straw, you can blow straight through it, right? As soon as you bend that straw, it becomes restrictive,
Right.
okay? So the same thing applies to exhaust. If anything, if you have to, upsize the pipe. Go from 3-inch to 4-inch.
I think he was saying that the 90 that they put on right from the factory, there's a 90 right from the factory.
The 90 down here, there's a 90 about 5 to 6 feet up, and then there's nothing here.
But they've already tested that, they've already made,
Right.
they've done that in the factory knowing that
That's
their
prep.
unit is.
And they did that because what will happen is on the old AT model, they didn't do that. They just had 2 pipes coming out of the bottom, and the plumber would go and just put a bunch of 90s on. And remember, the spider is kind of replacing the AT model. Okay, I know you're selling more spiders than you are ATs right now, right? An AT is a space thing, but it actually has both the pipes just coming out of the bottom of the water heater. And the plumber does not do what? Does not go over to the side of the water heater, grab the booklet and read. He just starts plumbing, and then if something goes wrong, then he calls us and we tell him, send us some pictures, and all of a sudden we see 6 90s in the first 5 feet, and we know what's wrong. All right?
Well, extra 90s.
Yep.
Richard, you said close proximity. In your mind, what's close?
Well, you should spread them apart no less than 3 to 5 feet. I prefer to see the 5 foot, but the book does say 3 feet. Like I said, if you take that straw analogy, it tells you exactly what you should do. And if it's any problem and you can't, if you upsize the size of the pipe, it helps because now you got a wider pipe, right?